in this video lecture, I will explain the paper by J.L. Mackie on the problem of evil and a response by St. Augustine. Mackie starts the paper by stating that all the arguments for the existence of God have been shown to be invalid. Well, at least according to Mackie. But religious believers may not be convinced. And I quote what Mackie says: "The theologian can, if he wishes, accept this criticism. He can admit that no rational proof of God's existence is possible. And he can still retain all that is essential to his position by holding that God's existence is known in some other non-rational way." So in other words, if it's true that all the arguments for the existence of God have been criticized and shown to be invalid, Mackie says it's not a problem for the religious person, because the religious person can always hide behind this mystery of non-rational means to know the existence of God. Fine. Well, but since we are talking about God, what exactly is God? In classical theism, God is an eternal and perfect being. This includes, but is not limited to, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. In other words, God is omnipotent. It means he's all-powerful. There's nothing that God cannot do. But typically, this attribute has been understood to mean that God can do anything that is logically possible. For example, I'm sure you heard that before. Can God create a stone so heavy he cannot lift? That sort of thing is just a pure absurdity, and God cannot do the absurdities. However, I have to say that in the history of philosophy, some philosophers, for example, René Descartes, thought that God can do anything at all, even that. But that's a discussion for another day. Also, another attribute of God is that God is omniscient. This means that God knows everything, past, present, future. He knows what you're doing now. He knows what you're going to be doing in 10 years and 100 years, if you're still around. Or the people who are not born yet, he already knows what they're going to do and what they're going to say. And also, most importantly, God is classically believed to be an omnibenevolent being. This means simply that God is all good. There's not one iota of evil in God. Everything that he does is good. Now, since believers can say that no rational proof for the existence of God is possible, then Mackie has a strategy to show that believers cannot hide behind that excuse. So let me quote what Mackie says. "I think that a more telling criticism can be made by way of the traditional problem of evil. Here, it can be shown not only that religious belief lacks rational support, but that they are positively irrational, that the several parts of the essential theological doctrine are inconsistent with one another." So this is a big deal. If Mackie can do that, his argumentative strategy is the classical problem of evil. And according to Mackie, the problem of evil in a particular logical form is capable of showing that religious belief is absurd, is illogical. So let me explain first what the problem of evil is and why it's supposed to show that belief in God is irrational. Well, let me state Mackie again. Let me quote Mackie again, because it's a perfect statement. So this is the problem of evil. God is omnipotent, right? He can do whatever he wants. God is wholly good, right? So he loves human beings and his creation. And also, I would add, God is omniscient, so he knows everything. And yet, evil exists. So there seems to be a contradiction among these three propositions, so that if any two of them were true, the third would be false. But at the same time, all three are essential parts of most theological positions. The theologian, it seems, at once must and cannot consistently adhere to all three. In other words, the problem of evil is that there's too much evil in the world. What do I mean by evil? Well, suffering, evil, murder, theft, all sorts of things that are that cause suffering, that are negative, disease, death, and so on. That's considered evil. Now, how is it possible, Mackie wonders, that God can do whatever he wants, is all-powerful. He is all good. He loves us. And he knows everything. So, presumably, he knows how to eliminate evil. And yet, evil exists. Now, Mackie says, the notion that God is omnipotent, wholly good, and all-knowing are the fundamental doctrines, some of the fundamental doctrines in theology. You can't get rid of them. But then if you want to maintain these doctrines, you have got to explain why evil exists. And the existence of evil, according to Mackie, does not match these attributes of God's. So these are the three propositions that Mackie says they can't all be true. God is omnipotent. God is only good. Some evil exists. According to Mackie, this is important. According to Mackie, there is a logical problem. A logical problem. These three propositions, these three statements cannot all be true. Either you accept that God is omnipotent and God is wholly good, but then there is no evil in the world. But there is evil in the world. Consequently, God cannot be omnipotent or wholly good. Now, Mackie realizes that there is no apparent contradiction among those three statements. It's not apparent. You need an intermediate statement or intermediate statements, what they call in logic. Mackie gives two intermediate statements. The first one is that if something is wholly good, if something is benevolent, infinitely benevolent, like God, it always eliminates as much evil as it can. And the second intermediate statement is that if something is omnipotent, it can do anything, including eliminating as much evil as it can. These seem to be plausible, right? If you think about it, a good and powerful individual will try to eliminate evil as much as possible. And it is these very two intermediate statements that, according to Mackie, can show that there is a contradiction among the three statements that I presented earlier. What are the solutions to the problem of evil? Since it seems that the principles imply a contradiction, Mackie spends most of the article considering the solution that have been presented by theologians. He distinguishes two solutions: adequate and fallacious, not adequate. The adequate solutions are three. You can deny that God is omnipotent, and then you have a solution. In other words, you can say why evil exists: because God is not all-powerful. He lacks the power necessary to destroy or eliminate evil. Now, would a theologian accept this? Probably not. Most theologians, most religious people are not willing to give up omnipotence. That's a fundamental doctrine of theism. It's a fundamental attribute of God. Another solution is to deny that God is wholly good. So why is there evil in the world? Because God is not as good as we think. He doesn't really care that much about us. Would the theologian again give up this notion? No. It is a fundamental doctrine of theism that God is an infinitely powerful and an infinitely good being. The third solution is to deny that there's evil in the world, and that's kind of hard to do, because how can you seriously look at the world and say there is no evil at all? So what are the other solutions? Well, the solutions that theologians propose, according to Mackie, are the fallacious solutions. The first one that Mackie points out is that God cannot exist without evil, since evil is necessary as a counterpart of good. The idea is that good and evil are part of the same reality. Think about a coin. There are two different faces. One is good, one is evil. But you can't separate them. The coin comes with two faces, good and evil. Now, the response is that it is a limitation on God's omnipotence. Why does God have to live with good and evil? Can't God, since he's omnipotent, separate the two? Maybe it's not easy for us to separate a coin. God can do it. He's omnipotent. Why does he have to comply with evil? Typically, the reply is that omnipotence does not mean doing logically impossible things. For example, what would be a logically impossible thing? An example that I can think of is to create a triangle that has fewer or more than 3 sides. I think that would be impossible, even for God. Or what about to create a square circle? Well, that would be impossible, because you have to think about a circle without sides and a square that has sides. So the two geometrical figures are incongruent. They could never be one. That would be impossible. Or also another example is the famous bachelor. Not even God could create a bachelor. A bachelor is an unmarried man. Now, it would be impossible to create a bachelor who is married, because by definition, a bachelor is unmarried. But Mackie says, but wait a minute. Why is it illogical for God to create only good and not evil? And at the very least, we should expect much, much less evil than we observe in the world. Think about this. People go around shooting, killing, murdering, abusing others. That's evil. But what about natural evil? What about disease? What about earthquakes? What about all those natural phenomena, natural disasters that cause a great deal of suffering in the world? Why didn't God eliminate those, according to Mackie? The second solution: evil is necessary to bring about goodness. Well, Mackie is not impressed with this. So, what is the idea? The idea is that God uses evil to bring about goodness. For example, there is suffering in the world, okay? So God needs that suffering. Why? Because without suffering, let's say, for example, disease. Without disease, it would be impossible for human beings to develop compassion. Without slavery, it would be impossible to develop, liberality. And so on. So every evil that exists, it has a function. And the function is to bring about, to create, to generate some form of goodness. But Mackie is not impressed because he thinks that this implies a restriction on God's omniscience. Namely, God knows everything in advance. So if God knows in advance that in 1,000 years from now, there's going to be slavery, God can just simply avoid that, eliminate that before it happens. God knows about HIV. He knew about HIV before human beings were born, according to theism. Why didn't he create the world in such a way that human beings would never experience HIV? It would be simple for God just to snap his fingers and eliminate HIV or prevent HIV from ever existing. What about cancer? Why didn't God create the human beings without cancer in the first place? Do we really need cancer to bring about some goodness? Maybe we do need some form of suffering, Mackie would say, but not as much as we experience in the world right now. I mean, look around how the world is a mess. There's so much evil. We don't really need that. There's so much suffering. Babies suffering. People starving. Do we really need that? Okay, what's the third solution? A universe with some evil is better than a universe with none. So the idea, again, is without disease and pain, it would be logically impossible to have medical advances and feeling sympathy for others. But once again, God knows everything. He can do everything. So if God creates a world without pain and disease, who cares about medical advances, right? Again, there's too much evil in the world. So it is actually better, according to Mackie, a world without evil whatsoever. What about solution 4? Evil is necessary for free will. That's what we are going to discuss next, by the way. So the idea is evil is not God's fault. Blame it on humans, because humans are the ones who murder, steal, cheat, and so on. They inflict evil and suffering on others. Yes, but God created people, didn't he? Now, here's how Mackie replies. I'll quote. It's a long quotation. If God has made man such that in their free choice, they sometimes prefer what is good and sometimes what is evil, why could he not have made man such that they always freely choose the good? If there is no logical impossibility in a man's freely choosing the good on one or several occasions, there cannot be a logical impossibility in his freely choosing the good on every occasion. God was not, then, faced with a choice between making innocent automata and making beings who, in acting freely, would sometimes go wrong. There was open to him the obvious better possibility of making beings who would act freely but always go right. Clearly, his failure to avail himself of this possibility is inconsistent with his being both omnipotent and wholly good. So once again, if God is wholly good and wholly powerful, why didn't he create the world without evil? The response is because people are free. And Mackie says, yes, but why didn't God create free-willed people who never choose to do evil? Okay, so let's look at Augustine's free will defense. Augustine was a North African philosopher. He was born in 355. He died in 430, Common Era. So it's an early medieval philosopher. And Augustine was considered one of the greatest Christian philosophers and one of the church fathers, one of those who wrote about Christian doctrine. In his work on the free choice of the will, he explains why there's evil in the world. So in an anachronistic way, I'm going to show you how Augustine would have replied to Mackie's injunction that there's something funny, there's something strange about God's omnipotence and omniscience and the existence of evil in the world. First of all, what does it mean to be free? There are several theories regarding freedom. Now, one theory is that human beings are determined. Okay? This simply, let me explain it simply. Think about the universe. Think about stars, planets. Think about atoms. Think about quarks, strings, subatomic particles of all sorts. Think about machines, trees. All these things that I mentioned do not have a mind. What does that mean? It means that, for example, planet Earth rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun, as you all know. But the Earth doesn't think, does not desire to rotate on its axis. I think, right? Now, we can put it this way. Earth is not free to rotate on its axis. The rotation on its axis is a determined action. What exactly determines that action? The laws of nature. So there are laws of nature, such as gravity, strong force, the weak force. There are many laws of nature. There are many constants of nature. And once again, these laws of nature, gravity, for example. Gravity doesn't think, I am going to pull down that object. Everything works mechanically. Particles in the universe don't have a mind either. They don't think. They don't have the freedom to decide what to do. Hydrogen molecules, hydrogen atoms and oxygen bind together. They form water molecules. They don't do that freely. So, in other words, the universe, in that sense, is determined by the laws of nature. So, given the laws of nature, everything that happens has to happen just that way. Given certain laws, then the world proceeds just the way it has to do. The world is whatever it has to be according to those laws. It couldn't be different. Now, the question is, what do we do with human beings? And determinism says that human beings are not special. They are made of the same things that I described. They are made of atoms. They're made of molecules. They're made of blood, flesh, bones. So what does that mean? It means that they are not free either. I know you're thinking, but I think that I am free. I am watching this video lecture because I decided to. Well, determinism says it's more complicated than that. You didn't really decide that you wanted to watch the video. You, for example, you are enrolled in this course, so that's the reason why you're watching this video. You can say, well, I'm enrolled in this course, but I could have just gone out to Central Park or to get an ice cream. I didn't have to watch the video. Sure, but if you watch the video, it's because there is a reason why you watch the video. And the reason cannot be your freedom. A reason could be, for example, that you desire to get a good grade. And your desire to get a good grade made you watch this video. But you say to me, well, but it was my desire, wasn't it? And determinism asks you, how did you get that desire? What gave you that desire? The answer can't be, I was free to have that desire. But think about it. Do you choose your desires? I don't think so. Just like, for example, your the genre of music that you like, you listen to. Do you choose? Could you, for example, let's say that you like hard rock and heavy metal, and you dislike pop music. Would you be free to choose to like pop music and hate hard rock and heavy metal? I think the answer is no. So your desires essentially are the products of, well, a long chain of things. Your upbringing, your brain structure, every experience that you go through in the world. And so everyone is determined. Now, if you believe that determinism is true, that every single thing in the universe is determined this way, you can either be what is called a hard determinist or a compatibilist. Hard determinist says we do not have any freedom because every word that I say, every thought that I think in my mind, everything just happens because it has to happen. And there is no self, individual self, that is free to decide. Or you can be a compatibilist, one who thinks we do have free will, but at the same time we are determined. We are determined in many different respects. But within this picture, determined picture of the world, we can make some contribution. We can change the future. Okay. Other people believe that determinism is false. So there are two options. You can be a hard indeterminist, okay? Or you can be a libertarian, which are very similar. Well, actually, they're not very similar. Let me correct what I said. Hard indeterminism means that nothing causes anything to happen. Okay? So the world is what it is now, but it could be different later. Nothing can determine anything. What about human beings? If you are a hard indeterminist, you believe that human beings do and say things, but nothing at all causes human beings to do that. Which means that the things that we do and think are completely random. The problem is that there is no freedom in randomness. Now, Augustine is a libertarian. Metaphysical libertarianism is the notion that we are free. But our freedom doesn't mean that we are completely, we do random things. We are free in the sense that we cause our own decisions. We make our own decisions. So if I say something or I do something, the answer is not that nothing caused my doing something or saying something. The answer for a libertarian would be that my saying something or my doing something was caused by myself. I decided it. Now, how do we know that we are free? How do we know that we are the authors of our actions and decisions, choices, etc.? Well, since free choice is obvious for all of us, it is absurd to deny it, first of all. So some people might say it's a basic self-evident principle. If you have seen The Matrix, the movie, The Matrix tells about a predicament that human beings live a grand illusion created by the Matrix, by this giant intelligent computer. In reality, human beings are used as batteries for the machines. And they live in these pods where they are fed by the machines and they are deluded. They are deluded that they live a normal life, but in reality, they live their whole life in pods. The same idea applies here. We have a basic, self-evident truth that we live in a real world with real people. We're not in pods being duped by machines into believing that we live in pods. So the notion of freedom is a basic principle. That's one way to respond. The best we can do is to show that it is absurd to deny it. Free will is also implied in every moral judgment that we make. When we act morally. Say that there is a person drowning in a Hudson River, and I see him. What do? All of a sudden, my sense of morality tells me that I have an obligation to jump in the river and save that man. Now that implies, according to libertarians, that I was free. Okay, so why does it imply that I'm free? The idea behind is the following. If I save that man, I have done something good. If I didn't save that man, now suppose that I am a good swimmer. I had the opportunity. I didn't have to go anywhere. I had the opportunity, the strength. I could do it. But I just walk by and I ignore him. I say, who cares about that? Let him die. There are many people in the world anyway. Now, most people would agree that I have done something wrong. Or at the very least, I was not a very good person in denying saving that man from drowning. Now, if this sounds right to you, if there is a difference between a morally good act and a morally bad act, that implies that we are free. If we were not free, if we were wet robots, just machines, biomechanical machines, either way would be equal. Not saving the man or saving the man from drowning would be just the same. But we do recognize that it's not the same. One is good, one is bad. That implies that we are free. Also, rewards and punishments. Right? If we reward people and we punish people, why do we do that? if you are determined, if you say, well, I stabbed that man and he died, okay? Then if you are determined, we shouldn't punish you. We have no right to punish you. Because, after all, you were not free. You were determined to do it. But that's simply absurd. We do reward people and punish people for what they do. We have good reasons to think so. We have good reasons, more of the good reasons to think that people freely do what they do than reasons for saying that people are determined and do what they do because of the laws of nature. So freedom is implied by the very fact that we wonder about evil. This is what Augustine would say about evil, I think, about freedom. Now, but he says much, much more about that. Okay? The question is, what is evil in the first place? There's natural evil and moral evil, as I mentioned earlier. But let me mention this again. Natural evils are bad or negative states of affairs. They are not brought about by people. For example, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, natural death, disease, anything that human beings do not cause, but anything that brings about suffering and evil. And also there is moral evils. These are brought about by people, deliberately. Murder, lying, stealing, and so on. So, if there is a form of love, if there is a form of friendship, if there is morality, if there is justice, if there is goodness, if all these things are true, and God created justice, friendship, love, etc., then doesn't it follow from this that God also created evil? If God is the creator of everything that exists, not only space, time, energy, and matter, but also love, humanity, concepts of beauty, concept of good, of goodness, it seems to follow that God also created evil. Now, for Augustine, there are two kinds of evil, or two kinds of evils. The first kind is evil that is done. That's what people do. And the other one is the evil that is suffered. Now, God, according to Augustine, does not do evil. That's obvious. God doesn't murder people. God doesn't steal from you. God doesn't lie to you. So he is not responsible for the first kind of evil. He accepts, Augustine, that God is responsible for the second kind of evil. Namely, God rewards people who are good, but he is justified in punishing people who are bad. Okay? So if you're a murderer, you steal money, you do bad things, you have to be punished, right? Just like in a court of law. A court of law would punish a murderer. They're not going to say, the judge is not going to say, okay, fine, go, you're free. Nothing's going to happen to you, but don't do it again. Punish that person, that murderer. Now, no one is going to say, oh, poor murderer, look what they did to him. It's evil. They put him in jail for the rest of his life. Isn't that evil? Augustine would say, yes, that's evil. But don't you think that the murderer deserved it? It is right. So that's what God does. God is responsible for some evil, but only when it's right to do so. And that's not the evil that people worry about. Okay, fine. But what is evil then? Why do we do evil? Well, think about what evil doing is. So think about evil acts like murder, like stealing, theft, lying, cheating, and so on. What do you see in common among all these evil doings? Augustine takes adultery as an example. Why is adultery evil? We all agree that adultery is evil, right? Adultery means that you cheat on your spouse. Why is it evil? And don't think of the act of cheating on your spouse, for example. So don't think of the external, what happens, the act, but think about the internal. So in the sense of what motivates adultery, okay? According to Augustine, it is evil because it stems from inordinate desire. Or some translation of Augustine's book translated as lust or cupidity. So when you have lust, when you have this strong desire for something that is inordinate, that's the meaning of evil. That's what evil is. In other words, Augustine defines evil as the following: the love of those things that one can lose against one's will. In other words, when you become in love, attached to something that you can lose against your will, that is the definition of evil. Think about money. There are people who love money so much. They live for money. They want to make as much money as they can. And if they have enough money to survive, they're not content. They want more. What happens if they lose that money? Oh, they're going to be destroyed. So your attachment to money, that way, to the point where you will be destroyed for losing that, that's what causes evil. That is, in fact, that is evil. Namely, lust, a lustful attachment to something. So adultery is not evil because the laws forbid it. Some laws don't forbid it. In fact, in our country, for example, there aren't any laws that forbid adultery. And it is not because people would not want for others what they do not want for themselves. An interesting note here. This is Augustine criticizing the Golden Rule. Something is not wrong because other people don't want that to be done to them. As a matter of fact, there are people who don't mind sharing their spouses. See, so the Golden Rule there doesn't apply. So why is adultery evil, according to Augustine? Again, because it is a form of lust, libido. And all the evils, think about it. That's what's in common among all the evils. All the evils come about because of lust, because a person is lusting, which means that a person is morbidly attached in love to a material thing. So to be good is to turn your desires, your lust, away from materialistic things, from money, from alcohol, from sex. All the things that you can lose against your will. All the things that you are unhappy when you lose against your will. Money, property, houses, riches, fame, and so on. So thinking and doing an evil deed involves lust. That's why they are sinful. Lust is the love of the things one can lose against his will. Only physical, material things, not spiritual things. Spiritual and mental things cannot be taken away from you by force. Think about it, your will, the will itself, cannot be taken away by force. Money can, your car can be repossessed by, I don't know, by the state, can be taken away. But they can't take away from you your will, your free will. They cannot take away your love for God, according to Augustine, for example. Desire for mental things implies that lust is a disorder, since the inferior disobeys the superior. So there are mental things, eternal things like God, love, and there are inferior things, material things like lust, like the lustful desire for sex with another person that is not your husband or your wife. The appetite of the soul, by which temporal things, material things, are preferred to eternal things. That's evil. Now, since adultery is about sex, after all, and sex is a material thing, it's a lower thing. Animals have sex. That's the animal aspect of humanity. Now, Augustine is not saying that sex is always wrong. It's always bad. What he's saying is, don't make sex the reason for your living your life. Sex is important for procreating. That's something that you do with your spouse. But why are you going to do it with another woman? If you do it with another woman or another man, that's because, not for procreation. That's not because it's essential. You're doing it because you are in love with sex. You love sex so much that you base your life, your principles of your life, on sex. And that's lustful. And therefore it's evil. Since our will makes us choose, is the will a good thing? Because the will makes us choose lustful things. So perhaps God should not have given us a free will. But Augustine says, but it's obvious that the free will is a good thing. Now think about it. God didn't give you a free will to sin, to lust. And by the way, nothing is stronger than the will. Nothing can modify your will. It's totally up to you. You are free, and it's totally up to you. Not even the devil can make you change your mind. If you do it by your own freedom. Remember the story of Adam and Eve? Why do they eat the fruit of knowledge? Totally on their free will. They were free to choose not to do it, but they chose to do it. So when we sin, we freely move away from spiritual goods and from God. Consequently, evil is moving away from the good. Freely. We do that freely. So evil is the absence of goodness. This is a very important point for Augustine. This is how he explains evil. Evil is generated by lust. But if you say, but what is evil in itself? Augustine responds that evil in itself is not a thing. There is goodness created by God. Evil is not created by God. Evil is like being in the dark. When you are in the dark, why are you in the dark? Because the light is off. Okay? So you're moving away from the light. You're in the dark. You're moving away from the heat. What happens? You experience cold. Similarly, when you move away from the goodness of God, you experience evil. But just like darkness, just like cold, they are not positive realities of the world. You see, heat is a positive reality because it is the motion of molecules, the motion of particles. Light also is photons. But what about darkness? Darkness is not a property of the world that exists. It is merely the absence of photons. Cold is the absence of motion. Similarly, evil is the absence of goodness. So you can't say that God created evil. Now, why didn't God just prevent the will from doing evil? It would be easy for God to do it, right? Sure, God could have done that, but at a very high cost. Think about it. God would have to cause or determine the will never to turn away from spiritual goods and do evil. Now, in such a case, we would not freely do what is good or what is right. So if God had created human beings in such a way that they always choose to do the good, like J.L. Mackie complains about, what would that mean? That would entail that God would have had to create human beings and prevent them from doing whatever they want. And consequently, then humanity would not be free. They would be, in a way, like puppets, like God's pets, that they always do what is right because they are commanded to do what is right. But God didn't want a world of pets or puppets. God wanted human beings who are responsible, who are free, and they are free to decide whatever they want to do. If they decide to do good, that's good for them. If they decide to do evil, that's because they have the freedom to do evil. God doesn't want people who do always good because He made them to do always good. What kind of world would that be? But if God is omniscient, He knows our future and knows who and when will sin. Doesn't that imply that we are determined? Well, Augustine says that's not true because God is free and yet He knows his future. All right? Also, there is no logical contradiction between God's foreknowledge and our actions. God sees us from outside time. Now, I think what Augustine precisely says is the following. Look, just because I know what you do tomorrow, it doesn't mean that I determine you to do that tomorrow. Let's say that I have a time machine and I travel in the future. So I'm there tomorrow and I see that you're drinking a glass of water. Then I take my time machine and go back and say to you, tomorrow, precisely at 2 p.m., you're going to drink a glass of water. That's true, isn't it? That you're going to drink a glass of water. But I didn't make you drink that glass of water. You do that freely. You will do that freely tomorrow. That's what Augustine says. It seems suspicious. There are some problems with that argument. But I leave the criticisms and the questions to you. So in this lecture, I explained the problem of evil and one of the solutions of the problem of evil. If you have questions, ask all your questions, and I'll be glad to answer all your questions. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture.